Welcome to GBRLIFE Transmissions. I'm your host, Caitlin, and you're listening to GBRLIFE of Crimes, where we explore not just what happened in crimes committed by women, but why it happened, and the psychology behind them. Today we're diving into one of history's most fascinating female killers, a woman who turned the American dream into a nightmare of greed, manipulation, and murder. The year is 1859, and in a small Norwegian village called Selbu, a baby girl is born into poverty. Her name is Brynhild Palsdatter Sturseth, though history would come to know her as Belle Gunness. What transforms an immigrant farm girl into one of America's most prolific serial killers is a question that has haunted criminologists and psychologists for over a century. She was a towering woman, standing at 6 feet tall, weighing over 200 pounds, with a face that accounts describe as plain, but somehow magnetic. Belle wasn't your typical image of a female murderess, and that's exactly what made her so dangerous. In an era when women were seen as naturally nurturing and gentle, Belle would use society's prejudices as her greatest weapon. In 1881, like thousands of other Europeans, Belle crossed the Atlantic seeking the American dream. But her version of that dream would become a blueprint for a nightmare. What's fascinating from a psychological perspective is how easy she built her facade of normalcy, a skill that many experts now recognize as a hallmark of organized psychopathy. Think American Psycho, but set in the mid to late 1800s. Starting in Chicago, 1884, Belle marries Mads Sorensen, and together they open a candy store. But here's where we see the first glimpse of her pathology. The store mysteriously burns down. Insurance money flows in. And then Mad dies. Coincidentally, on the single day when both his life insurance policies could be collected. Let's pause here and examine this pattern, because it's crucial to understand Belle's psychology. We're seeing 3 key elements that would define her crimes. Financial motivation, extremely clear today, but back in the 1800s and for women, this wasn't always considered during an investigation. But what I'm sure an investigation would have found if one had actually been done was that the next 2 elements that would define her crimes of careful planning and the use of traditional female roles was a cover. When Belle moved to LaPorte, Indiana, she evolved her methods. She purchased a farm, creating a respectable facade and a convenient burial ground, which of course didn't end well when she met her second husband, Belle Gunness. He died within months. Accident, she claimed. The local community whispered, but nobody dared confront the imposing widow. What happened on that LaPorte farm represents one of the most sophisticated killing operations in criminal history. Belle's method was brilliant in its simplicity. She placed advertisements in Norwegian language newspapers, presenting herself as a wealthy widow seeking marriage. One of her actual ads, it stated, "Personal, come widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided, with a view of joining fortunes." The psychological manipulation in these ads is masterful. She specifically targeted Norwegian immigrants, so men who might not be missed, and who carried their life savings with them. These were men who would understand her background, and the ads themselves were carefully crafted to appeal to both greed and loneliness, which brings us to April 28th, 1908. Belle's farmhouse burns to the ground. In the ruins, investigators find the bodies of her children. Yes, she had children, which of course is horrible in every possible way. Many just brush past that part, but those children must have had a difficult life, knowing what their mother did, and they would have known. And having been killed by the person who should love you the most shows how evil this woman was. The additional remains that were found were, well, it appeared to be Belle herself, except for the head. But was this her final victim or her ultimate escape? Then there was the discovery of bodies buried across her property, and I mean all around her property, which revealed the true scope of her crimes. At least 12 confirmed victims, though estimates range as high as 40. Each body told a similar story. Wealthy men, usually immigrants, usually poisoned, and always robbed. Now let's do what we do best at GBRLIFE of Crimes and dive deep into the psychology behind these horrific acts. What makes Belle Gunness's case so fascinating from a psychological perspective? First, let's consider her classification. Belle displays characteristics of multiple killer typologies. First of all, she was organized. Her crimes were methodically planned, which I mentioned earlier, and then she was hedonistic, which is often said when financial gain is a primary motivator, but the word itself means that she was devoted to pleasure, and we know money does buy nice things. But money and organization wasn't her only typology. She clearly manipulated and dominated her victims, which points to her deep need for power or control. But Belle's psychology went deeper than simple categorization. In regards to her psychopathic traits, she had superficial charm, shown in her ability to attract victims through letters and personal interaction. She also maintained elaborate false narratives, which means she was a pathological liar. A liar with a clear lack of remorse, because there is also no evidence she ever expressed guilt. And with her calculated manipulation, since her entire operation was based on careful psychological manipulation, it's not surprising she didn't feel guilty. She also had the shallow effect. Witnesses noted her unusual calmness after her husband's, many of them, and their deaths. We all behave differently when something shocking occurs, but when someone is eerily calm, it can raise a few red flags, in addition to everything else mentioned. So, why is she like this? Was she born this way? Well, it's speculated that her early life in poverty might have created an obsession with financial security, and the power dynamic she created could represent a response to early powerlessness. Plus, her targeting of male victims might suggest past trauma involving men. In other words, she could have been a victim herself at a young age. With Belle, one of the most fascinating aspects of her psychological profile was her masterful exploitation of gender roles in the early 20th century America. This is when women were viewed as inherently nurturing and gentle creatures, and Belle weaponized these stereotypes to devastating effects. She understood that society's rigid views of femininity created a perfect blind spot for her activities. Who would suspect a mother, a widow, a seemingly vulnerable woman seeking companionship of being capable of such calculated violence? Belle crafted her public persona with surgical precision, presenting herself as the epitome of maternal domesticity. A hard-working farm woman seeking a partner to share her life, she played into the period's romantic notions of the grieving widow, using the sanctity of marriage itself as a lure for her victims. The fact that she chose to murder through traditional feminine methods, poison in coffee, food laced with toxic substances, further demonstrates her understanding of how to operate within while simultaneously subverting the gender expectations of her time. The truly chilling aspect of Belle's psychological profile becomes apparent when we examine her profound attachment issues and complex responses. Basically, in modern psychological analysis, it would suggest that she exhibited signs of severe attachment disorder. Her ability to form relationships solely for the purpose of exploitation indicates a level of emotional disconnection that goes beyond simple psychopathy. These weren't just crimes of opportunity. They were elaborate performances where Belle could maintain the facade of an intimate connection while remaining completely detached from her victims. Sadly, this attachment disorder can be seen in her relationship with her own children. The fact that she was willing to murder them in what may have been her final act, because we don't know if it was her, suggests a complete absence of maternal bonding, a psychological anomaly that challenges our fundamental understandings of human attachment. Her method of creating and destroying relationships points to someone who understands the human connection, but wasn't capable of actually experiencing that emotional reality. And what makes these aspects of her psychology particularly noteworthy is how they intertwined. Her attachment disorder may have actually enhanced her ability to exploit gender roles, as her emotional detachment allowed her to view these societal expectations purely as tools for manipulation, rather than genuine social bonds. This is a person that we can actually see how psychological trauma and societal expectations can combine to create something truly terrifying. A predator who understood exactly how to appear as prey. What's also fascinating about Belle's evolution as a killer is that she didn't just snap, she developed over years, refining her approach with each victim. This suggests a level of psychological sophistication rarely seen in serial killers of any gender. If Belle were around today, modern forensic psychologists might diagnose her with antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and possibly schizoid personality disorder because of her emotional detachment. The combination of these conditions, along with her intelligence and her methodical nature, created what one might call a perfect storm of criminal psychology. Belle Gunness's case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. She challenges our assumptions about gender, evil, and the capacity for human deception. In many ways, she was ahead of her time. A quote-unquote modern killer in an era before criminal psychology existed to classify her. And her story continues to fascinate because it represents something we struggle to understand. How can someone appear so normal while harboring such darkness? It's a question that lies at the heart of what we do here at GBRLIFE of Crimes. This has been GBRLIFE of Crimes, part of GBRLIFE Transmissions. I'm Caitlin, reminding you that understanding the darkness helps us appreciate the light. Join us next time as we explore another case that challenges our understanding of the criminal mind.